Well, I'm going to back it up just a little bit. Mama and I went down to Fort Worth for the Cowtown picking party. The little sign, it says walking, but they're on their phone texting.
For decades, Reba McEntire was one half of Nashville's ultimate power couple, building an empire alongside Narvel Blackstock that seemed unbreakable. But the 2015 divorce didn't just end a marriage. It dismantled a legacy, leaving the Queen of Country to reclaim her throne alone. Now, years later, a new development in Narvel's personal life has sent shockwaves through the inner circles of the country music industry, forcing Reba to finally address a situation she has spent years trying to avoid. As headlines swirl about Narvel's latest romantic chapter, Reba's reaction is not what anyone expected. Is this a message of peace, or has a hidden detail about the past finally come to light? Before we talk about the breakup, before we talk about the new relationship that has set Nashville buzzing, before we get to Reba McEntire finally saying out loud what she has been carefully not saying for years, we need to understand what was actually built. Because to understand why the end of Reba and Narvel's story hit the way it did, you have to first understand just how extraordinary the beginning was. Reba McEntire met Narvel Blackstock in 1980. She was already a rising star in country music, talented, ambitious, and working hard to separate herself from the pack in a genre that was notoriously resistant to crowning new queens. He was her steel guitar player, not her manager, not her business partner, not the architect of a commercial empire, just a musician in her band, sitting a few feet away on stage every night, watching her work. What happened between them was gradual and, by most accounts, genuinely complicated. Narvel was married to someone else when they met, a detail that has never fully disappeared from the conversation around their relationship, though both have addressed it over the years with varying degrees of candor. By 1989, after both had navigated divorces from their respective previous partners, Reba and Narvel married quietly. And from that moment forward, the personal and the professional became completely, almost inextricably, intertwined. Because Narvel Blackstock was not content to simply be the spouse of a country music star. He was a strategist, a deal-maker, a man who looked at Reba's talent and saw not just an artist but a brand, and who understood earlier than almost anyone in Nashville that the future of longevity in the music industry wasn't just about hit singles. It was about diversification, about television, about live performance infrastructure, about owning as much of the pipeline as possible. Under Narvel's management, Reba didn't just become one of the best-selling country artists of all time. She became a franchise. The television series Reba, which ran for 6 seasons and earned her a new generation of fans who had never bought a country album in their lives. The production company, the touring machine that was widely regarded as one of the most efficiently run operations in the live music industry. The brand partnerships, the carefully cultivated public image that balanced accessibility with genuine star power in a way that very few artists of any genre have ever managed. It was, by any objective measure, a remarkable achievement. And it was built by 2 people who were simultaneously running a marriage and a corporation, which is a combination that demands an almost superhuman level of compartmentalization. Those who worked inside the Reba Narvel operation during its peak years describe an environment that was professional, demanding, and unmistakably driven by Narvel's vision. Reba was the talent, the face, the irreplaceable creative center. But Narvel was the engine, the one who made the calls, brokered the deals, and ensured that the machine kept moving at the pace he had decided it needed to move. For 26 years, it worked. Remarkably, impressively, lucratively, it worked. But here is the question that nobody inside Nashville's tight-lipped inner circle could ever quite answer, even at the height of the partnership's success. When your husband is also the person who controls your career, when the man you sleep next to is the same man who negotiates your contracts and approves your creative decisions, where exactly does the marriage end and the business begin? And what happens to both of them when the answer to that question finally becomes impossible to ignore? August 2015. Nashville was in the middle of a summer that felt, on the surface, like any other. Festival season, radio rotations, the usual churn of country music's relentless commercial calendar. And then, without warning, a statement landed that stopped the industry cold. Reba McEntire and Narvel Blackstock were divorcing. 26 years of marriage. An empire built together from the ground up. A family that included Reba's son Shelby and Narvel's children from his previous marriage. A blended family that had, by all public appearances, genuinely worked. All of it suddenly, formally, irrevocably over. The statement released to the press was careful and dignified in the way that statements from people with enormous amounts to protect always are. It spoke of mutual respect, of remaining friends, of the deep bond that would continue through their shared family and professional history. It was, in the language of celebrity separations, essentially a masterpiece of saying nothing while appearing to say everything. But then Reba did something that nobody expected. In the weeks and months that followed, in interviews that were ostensibly about her music or her television work, she began to let the mask slip. Just slightly, just enough. And what came through those carefully managed cracks was something that reframed the entire narrative of the mutual, amicable split. She said, with a quiet directness that landed harder than any dramatic declaration, that the divorce was not her idea. Let that sit for a moment. Because in the world of celebrity separations, where image management is everything and the appearance of mutual decision-making is almost universally maintained, Reba McEntire, the queen of country, the woman who had spent 4 decades projecting unshakable strength, admitted publicly that she had not chosen this. That the ending of her marriage was not a joint conclusion reached by 2 people who had grown peacefully apart. It was a decision that was made, and she was on the receiving end of it. The emotional weight of that admission was significant. But what made it truly extraordinary was everything she didn't say alongside it. Because Reba, being Reba, did not collapse into bitterness. She did not name names or assign blame or use her platform to dismantle the man she had spent 26 years building a life with. She absorbed the pain with the same grace she brought to everything else, and she kept moving. Nashville, however, was not as restrained. The rumor mill that had been quietly spinning for months before the announcement went into overdrive. Whispers about the true cause of the separation circulated through industry circles with the particular intensity that only comes when people sense that the official story has significant gaps. There were suggestions about fundamental disagreements over the direction of Reba's career, about financial decisions that had created irreconcilable tension, about a shift in Narvel's personal priorities that had nothing to do with business at all. None of it was confirmed. Much of it was contradicted. But the whispers persisted, as whispers in Nashville always do, because in a city built on storytelling, people have an instinct for knowing when the song they're being sung is missing a verse. What made the fallout even more complex, and what took the story from a painful but relatively contained celebrity divorce into something genuinely unprecedented in country music history, was the realization that Reba and Narvel's separation would not exist in isolation, because the Blackstock family tree had another significant branch. And that branch was about to face its own devastating storm. The connection between Reba's heartbreak and the collapse of another high-profile relationship within the same family would soon become impossible to ignore. And when it did, it raised a question that the Nashville community is still quietly debating today. Was any of this actually a surprise to the people who were closest to it? To fully understand the layers of complexity surrounding Reba's current situation, you have to zoom out from the marriage and look at the broader Blackstock family landscape. Because what happened to Reba and Narvel didn't happen in isolation. It happened inside a family ecosystem that was simultaneously experiencing its own seismic rupture, one that would eventually attract even more public attention than the original divorce and drag the entire Blackstock name into a very different kind of spotlight. Narvel Blackstock's son, Brandon Blackstock, had married Kelly Clarkson in 2013, and for a brief, shining moment, it seemed like the Blackstock family had achieved something almost dynastically remarkable. 2 generations of the same family, each paired with one of the most prominent female artists in American music. Narvel with Reba, Brandon with Kelly, a country music family that had essentially become a pop culture institution. By 2020, that institution had developed a catastrophic structural fault. Kelly Clarkson filed for divorce from Brandon Blackstock in June of that year, citing irreconcilable differences, the same carefully neutral language that had accompanied Reba's own separation 5 years earlier. But unlike Reba's divorce, which had been conducted with a level of discretion that the Nashville community genuinely respected, the Clarkson-Blackstock split became a prolonged, public, financially brutal legal battle that played out across court documents, tabloid headlines, and eventually, the pages of mainstream entertainment journalism. The details that emerged from those proceedings were striking. Allegations of financial mismanagement, disputes over the Montana ranch that had served as the family's retreat, a custody battle over their 2 children that stretched across multiple court dates and generated the kind of coverage that no one in the Blackstock orbit could have anticipated or welcomed. Brandon was ultimately ordered to pay Kelly significant sums, and the financial reckoning was, by any measure, severe. For Reba, this created a situation of extraordinary delicacy. Because Kelly Clarkson was not just her former stepson's wife. She was, in a very real sense, family. A woman who had come into the Blackstock orbit during the same years that Reba was navigating her own separation, who had experienced her own version of the pain that comes with loving a Blackstock man and then losing him. There was a bond there. Unspoken, complicated, but genuine. Reba handled it with the diplomatic precision of someone who understood exactly how many landmines surrounded her. She expressed support for Kelly without condemning Brandon. She maintained her relationship with Narvel's family without weaponizing it against the woman who had become, in the public imagination, something of a kindred spirit. She walked the line with a steadiness that impressed even the people who were watching most critically. But here is where it gets interesting, because those who were present at a specific gathering of the Blackstock inner circle during this period have described a conversation that went significantly beyond the diplomatic. A conversation in which the true nature of the Blackstock family's internal dynamics was laid bare in a way that reframed not just Kelly's experience, but Reba's own. A moment where someone in that room said something that connected the dots between 2 divorces, 2 women, and 1 family in a way that was deeply unsettling. What was said in that room has never been reported publicly. But the people who were there have confirmed that it changed the way at least one person understood everything that had come before. And that person, according to those same sources, walked out of that gathering with a very different understanding of why Narvel Blackstock does what Narvel Blackstock does, and what it means for the new relationship he has recently chosen to make public. For a man who spent the better part of 3 decades operating as one of the most powerful behind-the-scenes figures in country music, Narvel Blackstock has always understood the value of controlling a narrative. He built careers on that understanding. He structured deals around it. He managed the public image of one of the most beloved entertainers in American history with a precision that left very little to chance. Which is exactly why, when news of his new relationship began to surface, the way it surfaced felt so deliberate, so carefully timed, so unmistakably intentional. The woman at the center of this new chapter is Melissa Minyard. Not a household name, not a figure from the entertainment industry's front-facing world of red carpets and press junkets, but someone whose connection to Narvel's professional and social world runs deeper than the casual observer would initially appreciate. A woman whose presence in Narvel's life, according to those familiar with the timeline, predates the point at which most people assumed this relationship began. That timeline matters enormously, because the gap between when a relationship starts and when it becomes public is often where the most significant truths live. And in this case, the people paying close attention to the dates, to the social media posts that have since been quietly archived, to the event appearances that suddenly make more sense in retrospect, to the accounts of mutual friends who noticed something shifting well before any announcement was made. Those people are telling a story that is considerably more complicated than a widower finding love again in his later years. Nashville's reaction to the news was a study in contrasts. On the surface, the public response was largely generous. Narvel had been through significant personal upheaval. His son's marriage had collapsed spectacularly and publicly. The Blackstock name had taken reputational damage that even the most seasoned crisis management couldn't fully absorb. The idea of Narvel finding personal happiness felt, to many, like a straightforwardly positive development. But beneath that surface generosity, in the conversations happening in the green rooms and the label offices and the quiet corner tables of Nashville's industry restaurants, a different reaction was taking shape. Because Melissa Minyard's connection to Nashville's social ecosystem is not incidental. She moves in circles that overlap, sometimes directly, with the world that Reba McEntire has inhabited for 4 decades. And that overlap is not lost on anyone who understands how tightly knit and how long-memoried the country music community actually is. The specific social circle this new partner belongs to has raised eyebrows among those who know the full history. not because of anything overtly scandalous, but because of what it implies about proximity, about how long certain connections have existed, about the geography of Nashville's elite social world and how small it actually is when you start drawing lines between the people who occupy it. Reba, characteristically, did not react publicly the moment the news broke. She let the story breathe. She let the headlines run their course. She appeared at her scheduled engagements, gave her scheduled interviews, and presented to the world the image of a woman who was entirely at peace with the choices being made by the man she had once built everything with. But those who know her genuinely know her, not the carefully curated public version, describe a private response that was considerably more textured than the composed exterior suggested. A response that involved not just the emotional complexity of watching an ex-partner move forward, but a specific, pointed reaction to who he had chosen to move forward with. Because Reba McEntire doesn't miss details. She never has. It's one of the qualities that made her survival in a brutally competitive industry possible for as long as it has been. And the detail she noticed about Narvel's new relationship, the specific thread that connects Melissa Minyard to a chapter of Reba's own story, is the detail that nobody in the press has yet fully connected. What exactly did Reba notice? And why has she chosen this particular moment, after years of careful silence, to finally start talking? There is a particular kind of strength that only becomes visible in contrast. And for Reba McEntire, the contrast between the woman who quietly admitted she hadn't wanted her divorce and the woman who walked onto the red carpet with actor Rex Linn on her arm, confident, radiant, and completely at ease, is one of the most compelling personal transformations in recent country music history. Rex Linn entered Reba's life in a way that felt almost cinematic in its simplicity. The two had known each other casually for years, the way that people in overlapping entertainment circles often do. Familiar faces at industry events, friendly without being close. But during the early months of the pandemic in 2020, when the world contracted and the usual noise of public life fell away, they began talking. Really talking. The kind of long, unhurried conversations that are only possible when the treadmill of schedules and obligations has been forced to stop. By early 2021, they were confirmed as a couple. And the reaction from Reba's fanbase was immediate and overwhelming. Not just supportive, but genuinely joyful. Because Rex Linn is, by every account from people who have spent time around them, exactly what Reba needed after the particular kind of loss she had experienced. He is warm. He is grounded. He is, crucially, not her manager, not her business partner, not someone whose relationship with her is tangled up in contracts and revenue streams and the complicated mathematics of a shared professional empire. He is simply a man who loves her. And for Reba McEntire, after 26 years of a relationship where the personal and professional were fused so completely that separating them required something close to surgery, that simplicity was everything. The Rex era changed Reba's public posture in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. She became more willing to speak candidly about her past, more willing to acknowledge the emotional reality of the divorce rather than papering over it with diplomatic language, more willing, in short, to be a complete person in public rather than a carefully managed brand. It was in this context, this new emotional security, this relationship that gave her solid ground to stand on, that Reba began making the comments that set Nashville talking. Not explosive statements, not dramatic accusations, but a series of carefully placed observations in interviews and public appearances that, taken together, painted a picture of a woman who had processed her past thoroughly enough to finally speak about it with something approaching full honesty. She spoke about the difficulty of losing a marriage and a manager simultaneously, of having to rebuild not just her personal life but her entire professional infrastructure at a point when most people in her position would have been winding down rather than starting over. She spoke about the loyalty she had extended throughout the Blackstock family's various upheavals and the complexity of maintaining those relationships across the fault lines of multiple divorces. And then, at a private industry gathering that was not intended to generate headlines, Reba said something that leaked out through the particular osmosis by which things always eventually leak out of Nashville's supposedly closed circles. A comment about Narvel's new relationship that was characteristically measured on its surface but contained, for those who knew the full history, an unmistakable edge. She acknowledged the relationship. She wished Narvel well, genuinely, those present insist, not performatively. But she also noted, with the quiet precision of someone choosing their words with extreme care, that some patterns have a way of repeating themselves. That the things we don't examine in ourselves have a tendency to show up again in new circumstances wearing different faces. It was the kind of observation that could be read as philosophical wisdom from a woman who has done her inner work. Or it could be read as something considerably more specific, a warning, or perhaps a confirmation, rooted in knowledge that Reba has never fully made public. Because here is what that leaked comment suggested to the people who heard it and understood its context. Reba McEntire knows something about the way Narvel Blackstock operates, something beyond what has appeared in any court document or tabloid story, that makes his new relationship land differently for her than it does for the general public. And just as she seemed to be moving toward saying it openly, something stopped her. Something that originated not from her own hesitation but from a very deliberate intervention by someone in the Blackstock camp who had every reason to ensure that particular conversation never fully completed itself. What was that intervention? And what does it tell us about the financial threads that, despite all appearances, still connect Reba McEntire to the man she has spent a decade trying to move beyond? In Nashville, reputation is currency. It always has been. The city runs on relationships, on handshake deals made in back rooms and long memories that stretch across decades of shared history. And in that environment, the slow, steady erosion of the Blackstock name, once one of the most powerful in the entire country music ecosystem, has been watched with a mixture of fascination and something that in some quarters looks uncomfortably close to satisfaction. Because the truth is that Narvel Blackstock made enemies on his way up. Not the dramatic, confrontational kind that generate headlines. The quiet kind. The kind that accumulate when a man operates with the level of control and calculated precision that Narvel did for 30-plus years, leaving behind a trail of people who felt managed rather than partnered, leveraged rather than valued. Those people didn't forget. They simply waited. And the combination of Reba's divorce, Kelly Clarkson's catastrophic legal battle with Brandon, and the subsequent public scrutiny of the Blackstock family's business practices gave those people something they had been waiting a long time for: permission to talk. The conversations that began circulating through Nashville's industry infrastructure in the wake of the Clarkson-Blackstock proceedings were revelatory in their consistency. Former clients, former collaborators, people who had sat across negotiating tables from Narvel at various points across his career and walked away feeling that something wasn't quite right but couldn't articulate exactly what. Suddenly they found a language for it. Suddenly the pattern was visible in a way that individual experiences hadn't made possible. What emerged from those conversations wasn't a single smoking gun. It was something more insidious, a portrait of systematic imbalance, of management arrangements structured in ways that consistently favored the manager over the artist, of financial agreements that looked reasonable on the surface but contained provisions that only revealed their full implications years down the line, of a management style that prioritized dependency, keeping artists close, keeping them grateful, keeping them in arrangements that were difficult to exit cleanly. Reba McEntire, it should be noted, built her post-divorce life in a way that directly contradicted this model. The reconstruction of her professional infrastructure after 2015 was deliberate and methodical. She assembled a new team, renegotiated her arrangements, and ensured that the control she now exercised over her career was genuinely hers in a way that it hadn't fully been during the Narvel years. The success of that reconstruction, the television work, the continued touring, the voice coaching stint, the remarkable sustaining of her cultural relevance well into her 60s, stands as its own kind of statement. She didn't need the architect. She was the architecture all along. But the industry fallout from the Blackstock legacy has not been limited to reputation. Because buried within the legal proceedings that accompanied both the Reba divorce settlement and the subsequent Clarkson-Blackstock battle are financial details that have never been fully reported in mainstream coverage. Details about the structure of certain business entities that Narvel controls. About revenue streams that continue to flow from work that Reba produced during their marriage. About the precise terms of a 2015 settlement that, according to sources familiar with its contents, was not quite as clean and final as the dignified public statements of that time suggested. Court filings from a related proceeding, not widely covered, buried in the kind of legal documentation that requires specific knowledge to find and interpret, contain references to ongoing financial arrangements between entities connected to Reba's pre-2015 work and entities that remain under Narvel's management umbrella. The implications of those arrangements, if the sources interpreting them are correct, mean that the financial relationship between Reba McEntire and Narvel Blackstock did not end in 2015. It simply changed form. And if that is true, if the woman who has spent a decade projecting the image of a clean, complete break is still, in some legally binding financial sense, connected to the man who left her, then the question of why she has been so carefully measured in her public comments about his new relationship takes on an entirely different dimension. Because measured silence, in Nashville, is rarely just politeness. It is almost always strategy. What exactly is Reba protecting by staying quiet? And who benefits most from her continued discretion about a settlement that may tell a very different story than the one the public has been allowed to see? There is a tradition in country music that runs deeper than any chart position or award show moment. It is the tradition of the dignified woman, the one who absorbs what life delivers, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and transforms it into something beautiful, into a song, into a performance, into the kind of grace under pressure that audiences have responded to for generations because it mirrors something they recognize in their own lives. Reba McEntire has embodied that tradition more completely than almost anyone in the history of the genre. It is, in many ways, the foundation of her extraordinary longevity. The reason she has remained not just relevant but genuinely beloved across 5 decades of an industry that discards women with a casual brutality that it rarely applies to men. But tradition, however powerful, has a cost. And the cost of the dignified woman tradition is that it can become its own kind of silence. Its own kind of holding back, its own way of protecting people who perhaps deserve to be a little less protected in the name of a grace that has been extended far more generously than it has been returned. Reba's recent public statements about Narvel's new relationship represent something genuinely significant in this context, because for the first time, in language that is still measured but no longer entirely managed, she is allowing the full complexity of her feelings to be visible. Not the bitterness. She is too self-aware and too strategically intelligent to let that surface publicly. But the truth, the acknowledgement that 26 years of shared history cannot be resolved into a press statement. That watching the man who chose to leave build a new life carries an emotional weight that doesn't simply evaporate because you found your own happiness with someone else. She has said, in recent interviews, that she wishes Narvel well. And those who know her insist this is genuine, that the work she has done on herself in the decades since the divorce has been real and thorough, and that the bitterness that would have been entirely understandable has been genuinely processed rather than simply suppressed. The Rex Lynn chapter of her life is not a performance of moving on. It is the real thing, but wishing someone well and trusting them completely are not the same thing. And Reba's carefully worded observations about patterns repeating, about the things we don't examine finding new expression in new circumstances, those observations carry the weight of specific knowledge. Of a woman who watched something unfold from the inside for 26 years and recognizes, with the clarity of distance, what she is seeing begin to take shape again. The public's perception of Narvel Blackstock has shifted considerably over the past several years. The man who was once regarded as a visionary, the architect who took a talented woman from Denton, Oklahoma and helped her build one of the most durable careers in American music, is now viewed through a considerably more complicated lens. The Kelly Clarkson proceedings did damage that no amount of dignified silence could undo. The financial questions that have emerged from various legal proceedings have added layers that the simple narrative of successful music manager cannot comfortably accommodate. And yet the Blackstock name endures. Because in Nashville, as in most industries built on relationships and long memories, names endure even when reputations don't. The infrastructure Narvel built still exists. The connections still function. The new relationship with Melissa Minyard slots him back into a social world that has the memory to know his history and the pragmatism to work with him anyway. Reba McEntire has reclaimed her voice. She has rebuilt her empire on her own terms. She has found love that is uncomplicated by contractual obligation and professional dependency. By any measure, she has won, not in the petty, competitive sense, but in the deeper sense of having survived something genuinely difficult and emerged from it more fully herself than she was before. But the one piece of this story that remains unresolved, The thread that connects the 2015 settlement to the current financial questions to Reba's knowing observations about Narvel's new relationship has never been pulled completely into the light. The Queen of Country knows something. She has always known it. And the question of whether she will ever say it fully, clearly, and on the record is the question that everyone in Nashville's inner circle is currently holding their breath about. Because if she does, if Reba McEntire finally decides that the tradition of the dignified woman has protected the wrong people for long enough, the story of the Blackstock Empire will need to be rewritten from the very beginning. And something tells us that rewrite is coming sooner than anyone expects. While Reba has mastered the art of the classy response, her most recent, unfiltered comment about Narvel's new partner hints at a secret that dates back to the very last month of their marriage. If what the insiders are whispering is true, the reason Reba didn't want the divorce wasn't just about love. It was about a warning she received from a third party that is only now coming true. What did Reba know back in 2015? And is she finally ready to let the world in on the real reason the music stopped?